Hey, it's Debbie Potts, and I am going to help you figure out how to use a continuous glucose monitor. We get all this data from all these different devices, but do you know what to do with it? Do you know how to use that data to figure out when to eat, what to eat, maybe how you're eating, how stressed you are? Also, about exercising. What type of exercise should you do? When should you eat before or after the workout? What about your sleep? How is your sleep quality? Is there something else going on? Do you wake up in the middle of the night? Is your blood sugar high while you're sleeping? There's liver time in Chinese medicine about 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. What are you doing before bed to help your sleep quality? So there's a lot of different things that we can learn about our health, our metabolic health, when we monitor our glucose and getting your resting metabolism tested, ideally, as I do with PNOE, metabolic testing cart, resting and exercise test for active metabolism. So we want to figure out what to do with it, though. So let's talk to Catherine from Nutrisense and help make sense of how to collect that data, make sense of that data we're collecting from Nutrisense or other CGMs. So let's bring her on. All right, I have Catherine from Nutrisense to help us understand how we can improve fat loss, performance, longevity, our metabolic health. So, Catherine, thanks for coming on the podcast to share some of your knowledge and experience and all of that going on in your world.
Thank you so much for having me, Debbie. I'm happy to be here and talk about it. Yeah. It's always exciting to talk to people who are equally excited about health and longevity and tracking and all that stuff.
Well, that's the thing, though. People are excited and love to collect data, but my purpose of having you on today is help understand what to do with it because people collect way too much data. They're driven and ambitious is great, but also you might get too much information overload, and you're getting too much, Aura Ring and your Whoop Band and your Garmin and your Nutrisense, and there might be getting, ketones and breath tests with Lumen and all this stuff. Is like, all right, what do we do with it? What's too much and what's the right amount and how to actually use that information to better ourselves?
Totally. It's like, how do you see the forest for the trees, right? Or, it's like you're kind of stuck there and you've got all this collected info, right? Even those the very first like calorie tracker apps that came out, like, I don't even know how long ago, 15 years ago, like the very first MyFitnessPal kind of
Mhm.
thing. And everyone was collecting all this data and they were like, so now what? What do I do? Right. And so one of the things that really differentiates Nutrisense is that you have nutrition support guiding you through. So I don't know if your audience is familiar with what we offer, but just high level overview of Nutrisense is, we offer a really kind of cool synergy of three things, right? We have hardware in the sense of a continuous glucose monitor tracker. The sensor. Then we have a really great software. We have this awesome app that everyone downloads and can see all their data. But the third part that makes us really super special is having a special nutritionist assigned directly to you. So what you can do with all that data is that you have this educated professional that's like, I got you, I see you, and now let's take all this data and do something with it. Because it's really hard. I mean, you can just track like you can get a Libre, Freestyle Libre, and you can track, and then you're like, well, what does the line mean? I don't know what to do with it, right?
Yeah. So talk about what you do and what your role is and your background a little bit before we dive in.
Sure, absolutely. So, I'm a registered dietitian and I've been with Nutrisense for just over 3 years now. It's changed, it's grown. The app just keeps getting better and better. It's really exciting. And we have an amazing team of nutritionists that are highly skilled in glucose monitoring, metabolic health. I like to call them like my little, army of, not mine, but our army of metabolic analysts, right? We are so adept at looking at this data. And not just looking at it from a high level perspective, but really being able to drill down and see what's going on with our individualized members. So everyone that joins the program is now offered a call with a nutritionist to really help them dive in and overlay their own health goals that bring them to Nutrisense with what their data is showing.
Mhm. Now, what would your definition be of metabolic health?
Well, there's the clinical, right? So we've heard of metabolic syndrome, right? Those are those five factors: waist, a high waist circumference, high lipid markers, low HDL, and a high fasting glucose. So I personally think that that's the most telling biomarker of metabolic health. And so metabolic health to me is having all of those factors in a good level. And I think I've seen quotes somewhere, it's like a huge like it's like only 12% of the population is considered metabolically healthy, like something horrifying like that, right?
Mhm.
Don't quote me on that, but it's something really, really striking like that. So to have all of those factors in line is really impactful. But there's another way to look at metabolic health, and some of your listeners might be really in tune with this. And this is what we kind of call like a metabolic flexibility. To be able to be metabolically flexible makes you metabolically healthy. And so, metabolic flexibility, we talk a lot about being able to use those different sources of fuels, glucose, ketones, being able to sort of flex in and out of different types of carbohydrate uses, depending on what's going on in our lives.
That's the big word. I've been working on doing a little PowerPoint presentation on metabolic flexibility because I think it's gotten confusing over the years as we focused on burning fat, and that is all we think we need to just burn fat, and that carbs are bad, to burn carbs is evil, eat carbs is evil, that we want to just be in fat burning state all the time. So I didn't ask you this in advance, but do you have any thoughts on why it's important to be able to burn fat and carbohydrates and not just be in fat burn?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, I always say the brain prefers glucose over anything else. So a lot of times, if you're trying to get into like a ketosis, sometimes people talk about brain fog and things like that. So that can be difficult. And I always say, sometimes the body just needs carbohydrate, and that's okay, right? We're not in a zero carb game here. And it's really important also, I think, from like a lifestyle perspective, right? What we aim to do at Nutrisense with our members is to help them liberalize their diet as much as possible. And part of that is allowing people to experiment with their own, what we say, n equals one, like you are the experiment, I am the
Mhm.
experiment, to experiment and see what types of carbohydrates and in what quantities are best tolerated for your body, for your level of activity before a workout, after a workout, before a race, after. I mean, there's so many factors that go into it, that it's really important, I think, from a lifestyle perspective to be able to say kind of what works best for your body across all the food groups.
Yeah, and that's why I always find it important for my clients when I'm coaching people to wear a CGM for, I do because they last for 14 days, right? So, at least a month or two cycles because you learn so much. And I even think 90 days to really learn a full picture of, even different times of the year, seasonally. It'd be interesting with the changes in the daylight to darkness and question though to start with is what's optimal? We don't want to be normal, we want to be optimal. So what do you suggest? Ideally fasted in the morning when we wake up to post meals. Any guidelines there that we could share?
Yeah, of course. So we have our standard set of guidelines, but I always start with there is no perfect glucose, like you just said, right? There's no perfect day. There's just optimal for you. So new members, we say just let's get a read on your baseline. Let's see how you're doing with your regular breakfast, lunch, regular dinner, regular workout schedule. Let's see how you respond to stress in your daily life. Like,
Mhm.
let's not, and sometimes we get people that are like, oh, I'm doing this like really great 75 heart, or whatever it is that they're going through. And I'm like, well, that's great, but let's also try and test out some of those things you're going to do after that time when,
Mm,
sort of real life kind of
mm.
creeps back in. But in general, the things that we're looking for in the graph are to stay within the range of, say, we have the default of 70 to 140. So keeping your glucose within that range is really a good default. Some people prefer to be really tighter, a little bit more stricter, and you can adjust your guidelines, to whatever you feel most comfortable with. Second, we have like what we call our morning average, or what most people would think of as like a fasting glucose. And that's the average of your glucose in the 2 hours before your fasting window ends, whenever that is. So if you kind of fast, if you will, from say 7 p.m. to 9 a.m., you would set that window, and then your morning average is that fasted glucose state from say 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. And that's the average reading there. And we like to see that whatever your fasting window is, your morning average to be between 70 and 90. Again, that's a little bit of a stricter bandwidth or range than you might get at at your regular doctor visit. But that's really what we find to be optimal.
How would you look at the morning cortisol elevations and correlate that to the glucose measurements?
Yeah, for sure. There's that natural cascade of hormones overnight, those housekeeping hormones that clean everything up when we're resting. And for sure, we can see that there sometimes is a little bit of a gentle rise. I do think it's really interesting. This is where I tend to see stress come into play so much. I hate to say this, a lot of times it's with women. They wake up and they are like, oh my gosh, I've got 4,000 things to do today, and I'm running around and there's no time, and I've got everything, and it just really goes up. They also might be working out in the morning, which again is fine. And we do see those rises due to exercise, just not having enough available glucose. But for sure, we take that into account, and we can work through a couple different tests. It's always interesting to work with a member and say, okay, so we've got this increase in the morning. Is it from coffee that you're having? Is it just from being kind of stressed out? What if you sat outside for 10 minutes and got some sunlight? What if you did a 5-minute meditation, or did some journaling, or walked your dog? And like, let's see if any of that can kind of bring that down and start you out at a lower pace, at a lower baseline level for your day.
So going into exercise, as you just mentioned, and glucose changes, talk a little bit how your glucose might be higher because you exercise and why that happens, or if it drops, any correlations.
For sure. So I think that's one of when someone puts on a CGM for the first time and they're like, why did it do that? What's going on? I didn't eat anything. So glucose can rise during exercise. If the exercise is sort of more intense, we tend to see this with like a HIIT workout, a very hot yoga class, or anything that's really, really intense, because the body does not have enough available glucose in circulation, so it will pull it out of storage, and that will look like your glucose is increasing, but it's from an internal source. So the body is doing that just basically to fuel your workout, and then you should see a subsequent drop back down once the activity is over. Well,
What
go
would
ahead.
cortisol do with that? Because if it's stressor, as hard, intense exercise or hot yoga, like the sauna too, would cortisol raise glucose and show that in a CGM measurement too?
It's not, it's interesting. It's not really a cortisol response of like fight or flight kind of like stress response on the body. So I don't know that it's necessarily cortisol induced. It is just more kind of like cells needing the energy and the fuel for it. And so it's that hormetic stress that's good for the body, that the body
Mm.
adapts well to.
Yeah, and then with stress itself, what have you learned with people just I mean, when I was wearing mine and I need to go get a new one, if I'm in traffic or, stressful phone call or work, how does stress interact with our glucose levels?
Oh, totally. I think that's also one of the biggest aha moments when someone puts on the sensor is, again, they're like, I didn't eat anything. Why did it jump up at 10:30 in the morning, you know? And then we always sort of I asked some questions and they're like, oh yeah, like the school called. I had to like go get my kid and my whole day got thrown off. And yeah, that's exactly happened. Or I had a member who, every Sunday her glucose would spike and she's like, I don't know why. I mean, I eat the same thing every Sunday. And then we talked about it, and she goes, "Oh, yeah, I had to deal with, like, a really difficult family member on, like, every other weekend, and I guess I didn't realize how much it was impacting me." I mean, I think that's really the
Yeah.
most, aha moment for so many people is to see the physical manifestation of stress on their body. 9 times out of 10, I ask somebody and they say, "No, I can handle my stress. I can handle it." And then
Wow.
they see it and they go, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea what was going on kind of out of my control in my body about stress." And so it's been really interesting to work with people. Once they're aware of it, they might not be able to necessarily change it. You can't always change when
Mm.
child gets sick or the dog has to go to the vet, something like that. Can't change those, but you can at least understand what's going on inside your body and you can make choices after that, based on knowing that data.
Hmm. So my mind goes to heart rate variability, to looking at our stress response and looking at glucose if it raises with stress. If we go in fight or flight, we could correlate glucose with your heart rate variability if you could track it at the same time, maybe. Have you looked at that? And stress
Yeah.
management solutions along with it.
Right, 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 right. No, for sure. I mean, I think, ideally you could overlay like insulin and, and you could overlay like all of these really cool, sort of hormone levels in response to your glucose levels, which would just be like the coolest app ever. So if you find someone making it, let me know. But yes, absolutely. When you're getting those aura ring readings, and you're correlating even, your sleep, we can kind of see that data also in your glucose data, right? Like your overnight sleep, how rested you are in the morning and kind of where your baseline glucose is in the morning. So all of that, heart rate variability, all of that kind of data that you're getting maybe from another wearable is super interesting when you look at it in light of the glucose levels in your body.
Yeah, I remember Cara Collier we had on, I don't know, 3 years ago on the show. A couple times I had her on, and I was asking about spikes in the middle of the night while you're sleeping, why glucose goes up, and if it had anything to do with detoxification, body repair, parasites, and then correlate that, oh, is it a full moon? Does it change the moon cycle? I mean, you can really go down a lot of rabbit holes, or my brain does. Like, why does that happen? But have you seen any people with elevations during sleep and why that is? Where glucose rising?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we kind of, we look backwards to, what they had for dinner, what time they had dinner, movement after dinner, alcohol at night, timing of the meal, eating very late at night, eating very, high carbohydrates, rolling right from your meal to bed, can certainly cause, and then the composition of the meal, higher fat, that can just cause a delay in your glucose. And then therefore, much later on, many hours after you've eaten, your body will have a glucose spike as it gets around to processing your dinner. So that's always really interesting to people who aren't sleeping well. And then we start to make some little changes, little tweaks, and they start to see that their glucose levels even out overnight and they sleep better.
Hmm. Yeah, it's always that's the whole nighttime one's always interesting to me. Like, what's my body doing while I'm sleeping? Is it
Right.
doing everything right? Can I improve its housekeeping services to 5-star service, not a 2-star? Gotta make
Absolutely.
more sweeping, get more cleaning done while I'm sleeping inside my body. So another thought too on you just mentioned macros and food timing. What have you learned with the glucose monitor and continuous glucose monitor and what to eat and when? And I think what how would make part of that and anything in that area I think it's good to dive into.
Yeah, I think, well, there's a whole sort of, really interesting research that's been going on the past couple years in terms of chrono nutrition, right? Nutrition,
Mhm.
timing and circadian rhythms and, eating. more towards sunlight hours where our body is has naturally been adapted to, you're supposed to eat during the
Diurnal.
sunlight hours, not 9 o'clock at night when there's when the moon is out. And really interesting in terms of insulin sensitivity. We tend to see that we are more sensitive to insulin during daylight hours, and therefore, a lot of people will do intermittent fasting. I'm kind of agnostic on it. If you like it, that's great. If you don't, no problem. But a lot of people they find it easier to skip breakfast, and they will, intermittent fast until, noon or whatever, and then they'll open that eating window up into the evening. And we really find that if you could move your fasting window earlier, breaking your fast in the morning, and finishing your eating window during daylight hours, there's can be a significant improvement in your glucose values, which is really interesting to see for some people. It's a little bit harder because we're so wired to eat dinner, like our culture
Mm.
is so wired to have dinner. That can be kind of difficult to do, but really powerful if you can. And it is interesting, especially with our app, you can compare meals, right? So I always like to say, approach it as a science experiment. You are your own N equals one science experiment. So let's, find a meal that you really love and enjoy. Eat it at, say, 8 o'clock at night, eat it at 6 o'clock at night, eat it at 4 in the afternoon. Let's compare how your body handles the same meal, because also you're more likely to move around if you eat at 4 o'clock. You're more
Mhm.
likely to, maybe you won't have alcohol with it if it's at 4 o'clock. Or perhaps, you if you do want to have dessert afterwards, again, you're going to move around. There's more likelihood that you're moving around, using up some of that incoming energy. So people are always really fascinated to see that. And again, we're hoping to liberalize someone's diet, right? Really give them the tools so that they can make the best choices going forward. And this way they can really test out the foods that they're most curious about at various times of the day, so they know when to optimally have it.
Yeah, I think it is always an N equals one experiment. That's why I think it's such a powerful tool to invest in for, I said, at least, 30 days to 90 days to get at least that information. And then throughout the year, as I said, it'd be interesting winter time when we have less daylight compared to now in May, even though I'm in San Diego with May gray, the sun comes out later. And changes in our glucose and eating and our timing of that, it'd be kind of fun to see any data over a year period. So with that too, another question to add on is, the time of day. So I keep hearing, and I've experimented my own self eating in the morning because I was doing that. Don't eat till 11 in the morning and then stop eating at 4 o'clock. So I was doing a 5 hour eating window, but I work out at least once a day and I'm moving around. And so I think it's really good to use this data to figure out, am I fasting too much? Am I restricting my eating window too much? So what data do you see with people to help them figure out, all right, you need to maybe try experimenting a wider, longer eating window?
Totally. So a lot of this, again, we always like to approach it with, what are your goals, right? Is your goal to improve your performance, to improve your workouts? Are you training for something? Are you really concerned about your body composition, and we're looking at, putting on muscle? Okay, great. Then we need to figure out when you are working out and how you are refueling afterwards, in order to, for the body to be absorbing as much protein as possible, so that you can repair and rebuild the muscle, right? So that could be one goal. Another goal a lot of times we see is like energy levels, and that's why someone is fasting for a long time, and yet they're coming to us and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted and I don't know what I'm doing wrong, and I'm following this thing. And then we look at their data, and they're breaking their fast and they're having this massive swing, and then a huge crash afterwards. Then they're eating, and they've kind of lost control of the train. The train leaves the station and is going wildly down the tracks until they all of a sudden cut it off, and then they're not eating again, right? So they've imposed these restrictions, and they're not really enjoying the restrictions. So we definitely talk about, first of all, ways to break your fast. We always talk about breaking your fast with healthy protein, healthy fats, healthy fiber. That is the best way to what I like to say is sort of prime the pump, right? If you hit your system with some simple carbohydrates, it will cause your glucose to go skyrocketing and then crash back down. So we want to make sure that whatever your fast is, you are breaking it in the way that will cause a gentle ocean wave and not a big tsunami.
Mhm.
And then, if someone prefers to work out fasted, absolutely no problem. But we just want to make sure that you're refueling properly afterwards. Again, you still as you if you are breaking your fast. So it's really about kind of the person, the lifestyle. What time does their job allow them to work out? What time does their job
Mhm.
allow them to eat? All of those kinds of specifications depending on who someone is.
So with the fasted versus fed exercise, how can a CGM help identify any areas that you could tweak with your nutrition timing? Would it be
Yeah,
lower, higher?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think a lot of times you have to overlay it with some journaling a little bit of like, that was a great workout, or I was
Yep.
struggling. Then we can kind of unpack that based on how the workout felt. Of course, if you're doing like a very, a huge, 15-mile run or something like that, I mean, that's a whole different kind of, pre-fueling, bringing something with you to eat, and then post run recovery. I mean, some of those bigger workouts, but when it comes to kind of a 1 hour hit class or something like that, again, we really look at, where did you come in? Where were you at your baseline, fasting level? What happened during the workout? And then really what happened afterwards? Did you kind of crash down? Did you reach for something immediately? That was probably higher in carb, like the smoothie as you're walking out the gym, and it's, chock full of juices and everything like that, and your glucose goes skyrocketing. You're not doing a lot to repair and rebuild the muscle. So we definitely talk about the types of foods that people are having. We want to make sure that they're whole foods, that you're getting a really good really good source of carbohydrate, but also a good source of protein after that, because it's really important. And then sometimes people are having like 50 grams of protein afterwards, and I'm always like, your body can't absorb that much at one time. So then it also we start to talk about the timing of meals, spacing out your protein intake to make sure that you're really getting the most bang for your buck.
So great point correlates to previous podcasts we just had out on protein and overeating protein that'll raise your glucose. Do you see that in a CGM? Because you're doing gluconeogenesis, taking that protein, break it down to raise your glucose if you're doing strict more carnivore.
I don't see it that much. I don't, you don't see like enough of an increase to make to make it look. Sometimes when someone's having a higher protein meal, the body will sense it and it will produce insulin. And so sometimes you can actually even see like a drop in glucose from a higher protein meal, just because the body is kind of like, oh,
Taking.
producing some insulin, trying to work everything out. And you can see a dip down from that.
So goes into another question on my list, insulin sensitivity. How can you correlate any data with a glucose monitor and insulin sensitivity or the opposite, insensitive?
Yeah. So first, I always like to, just because you never know where people, the listeners are coming at this from an education standpoint. So I always like to explain, glucose is something that you take in through your food. It's a simple sugar. It's like the smallest Lego building block that you have. Um, and then um, insulin is a hormone that the body produces. So you take in carbohydrate, the body senses that, and it produces insulin. If everything is moving in the way it should, if you're in a good glucose sort of homeostasis, everything's flowing as it should, your body will recognize that glucose, produce kind of the right amount of insulin. And the insulin acts like a key. And we like to sort of use the imagery of a key unlocking a
Mhm.
door or
Mhm.
unlocking a cell. So the insulin unlocks the cell and allows the glucose to enter. Unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't work. And there's lots of reasons why that might not work. But basically, it's the insulin resistance or insensitivity. Basically, the key isn't working. Someone changed the locks on them. And so it can't unlock the cells, and the glucose remains floating around in your bloodstream. And that's when the glucose can to stick to things, and it can sometimes stick to your red blood cells. And when someone goes to their doctor and they a hemoglobin A1C, that's really a measure of how much glucose is stuck to your red blood cells. And the higher your A1C percentage is, that means the more glucose is stuck to your red blood cells. And you're like, well, how did that happen? That happened because your insulin wasn't unlocking the cells and the glucose. Well, I'll just float around here for a while until I find a red blood cell to attach myself to. So people are like, "Oh, I had no idea that's what was going on." So that kind of explains at a very high level what's going on in the cell. And so when we see data where basically we have it doesn't even need to be that big of a spike, but a glucose increase, but a very long recovery. That shows to me that, like, what's going on here? Like, why isn't the body able to bring you back down to baseline within 2 hours? So that's when we see that the body's having some difficulty handling the carbohydrate load. Basically, you've taken in glucose at the start of your meal. Your glucose enters your bloodstream, which we see as the rise in your glucose. And then we should see, assuming the body is producing insulin, and we should see that your glucose goes back down to baseline because it's been shuttled into the cells and used up within 2 hours. That's when everything's working. If it's taking 3, 4, 5 hours for your glucose to come back down to baseline, that's when we're like, let's explore this a little bit more. Was it a huge load of carbohydrate? Your body couldn't handle it. Were you really sedentary and there just was no use for the glucose that was coming into your system? That's when we start to see, some signs, and then we want to play around with that and kind of see what's going on.
Yeah, I love that analogy of the insulin. I always learn that too. The key, can't open the door, get it in. And that's a great way to learn things is simple analogies. With the just figuring out your baseline. If you ideally we want to be 70 to 90 as your baseline, is what I've learned
Sure.
around.
Yes. Yeah. We have a lot of different ways to sort of slice and dice the numbers. I mean, ideally, your average glucose for the day should be under 105.
Mm.
So, yes, if you were to keep your baseline in that 70 to 90 range, and you kind of, again, we're not expecting a flat line, we're just expecting kind of gentle ocean waves. As long as you kind of come back down, you recover, that you recover back down to baseline, that's a really good marker to look at. And, some people just want to focus on that baseline and keep it as flat as possible. That's fine. Other people are like, listen, I just want to make sure that the carbohydrates I'm taking in, my body's able to process it efficiently.
So I've seen some people they don't go lower than 100. Is that a red flag that there's some insulin resistance there?
It can be, it can be insulin resistance. It can just be that you like, I hate to go back to stress, but they just run at a high. I mean, they just are like keeping it steady. They're under so much stress and they kind of don't realize the chronic stress that they're under. That sometimes they just really can't get any, further below that level just because of where they're at, and they're really struggling. And so that's when a lot of times, if your baseline's a little bit higher, we just start to work on some of those, again, baseline's higher, but yet you're still having sort of just, gentle rises and falls. That's when I know
Mm.
that you're taking in good nutrition. Perhaps you're exercising or you're moving around enough to manage, to bring yourself back down to baseline. But there's something else going on. Is it poor sleep? Is it high stress? Like there's something that's keeping you running at that higher level.
Yeah, that's why I'm always looking at the big picture and then diving in and it's just, zoom out so you can zoom in and then look at more root causes because there's never just one thing that's causing
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
With that 70, 90 up to 105, that's our baseline. When we're eating meals, you said the highest is 140, but I also read a lot of the functional medicine doctors out there is, um, I'm drawing a blank on everybody, but the average article I read that they all said like 120 to 130 was more optimal for your peak and not to go up to 140 or higher, but they like to see 120, 130 their peak, then come down. Dr. Hyman and I forget who's Ben Beckman and a bunch of other people are in some article I read. What do you think of kind of optimal versus normal for your
Yeah.
peak?
I've looked at so many so many people's data, and I just don't ever want, I find it really hard to counsel someone to a number, right?
Mm,
Because it's just like, you might be at a different point in your cycle than I am. You might have a different body composition. You might be coming to me with another diagnosis, something like that. Like, I don't want to assume everyone's supposed to stay under 120. I find that just kind of defeating and demoralizing, right? It's like saying everyone should stay under 130 pounds. Like,
yeah,
what does that mean? Like, that's not helpful.
yeah.
Um, and so, like, it's interesting. That's why we have another metric in, specifically when it comes to meal scores. We offer a score for a meal, we offer a score for the day, and we offer a score for a meal. So within that meal score metric, we have four different ways to break it down. One is your peak. So we do look at how high you went, right? We do look at how high that is. But what I think is way more interesting is the delta. I'm way more interested to see how much your glucose swung up than I am in terms of what that number was. You can swing from 80 to 120, and that's a 40-point difference. I don't like that. I want it under 30. But yeah, you're still under the 140 mark. Like, everything looks good, but it's not, right? Your glucose had a big swing. So I would prefer, instead of looking at the peak value of anyone's meal, I would much prefer to look at how much their glucose changed in that meal and how quickly they were able to come back down to baseline.
So glucose variability is what that is?
Absolutely. We really kind of, as a team, really believe that glucose variability is an interesting kind of predictor or proxy for that insulin sensitivity, right? Looking at that variability can kind of show us, like, is something going on here? What's happening? We like to see glucose variability less than 14. And so if
Mm,
someone's having, a much higher variability throughout the day, we think, maybe that's a sign that something's a little bit awry.
hmm. Interesting, isn't it? It's like so fascinating, probably even from when you guys started, all the data could you learn from, as you said, everyone's n equals one experiment. We get to see what everyone's doing and what happens when you change to more of a nutrient dense whole foods, real food diet versus eating processed foods and refined sugars, refined flours. Have you found a difference of when people make a swap of instead of eating this packaged food, just eat food from nature, changes in the
It's
glucose?
amazing. It's amazing. I always say, when people go out to, like, to a nice restaurant, they're always like, "Oh, I don't want to track." And I'm like, "No, no, I promise. Like, if you're gonna go to a really beautiful restaurant with, like just unprocessed, like, a great meal, like a lovely meal, I promise you, your glucose will look so much better than if you
Mhm.
have whatever sort of junk thing that got out of a package earlier in the day, or, some type of fast food." So I do think it's about people understanding the processing of their foods, the amount of the foods that they're eating. It makes a huge difference, right? The
Mhm.
level of healthy fats, the level, fats are not horrible. And in fact, they're quite necessary. We need fat to absorb fat soluble vitamins. So a lot of times people are like, "Oh, I never use fat." And I'm like, "Well, you need fat.
Mhm.
All of our cells need it in order to be highly functioning." So sometimes it's about sort of like, re-educating people in terms of, meal content, and allowing them to have that fun and play around with it.
So with that, kind of talking about fat, goes to nutritional ketosis, and people want to measure ketones and get like a zero 0.5 to 1 on their ketone meter. Is there any patterns, things that we can look at a CGM if people are trying to, if they're into seeing some ketones, or maybe they want to make sure they're burning fat and look at their metabolism, anything there that they can learn from CGM?
Yeah, I mean, they sort of are like opposites, right? So if your glucose is high and swinging around, you're definitely not burning fat,
Mhm.
because the body will always, the easier path to take is to use glucose as a fuel source. So if there's any type of glucose around, the body will prioritize using that. But yes, in our app, you can, if you are tracking your ketones, through Keto Mojo, or whatever it is, you can certainly add that data to our app, and you can overlay it on top of your glucose data, which some people find really helpful. And again, it can be really interesting if someone's very interested in that metabolic flexibility and
Yes,
flexing in and out. To
just gonna
your
say.
point, it's really helpful to track over a longer period of time so that you can see how your body's responding to a higher carbohydrate diet for a week or two, and then a much lower carbohydrate diet for a week or two. And that's really helpful trends, those trends over time that you can measure.
So you kind of said this a little bit, but metabolic flexibility and looking on the CGM, how do you know if you're burning fat or carbs without measuring your metabolism? Is there like your 70 to 90 in there? Is there any you're burning carbs if you're up over 140? How do you kind of just guessing?
Yeah, no, yeah, you can't. I mean, you can't know what the body's using for a fuel
Yeah.
source. We
So you
just
need
can't.
to test.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think yeah, you just have to test the ketone levels and then overlay it on top of your glucose
Mm.
levels.
I just wonder, I do PNOE, which I'm doing today, metabolic testing. So I do people's resting metabolism, which is a 10-minute test, and then their active test to figure out the metabolism while they're exercising in a 12-minute test at different intensities. So it's kind of fun to do that and then to put CGM on there. It's always kind of cool to put that all together. So, okay, what do you do when you're laying there resting? What's your respiratory exchange ratio, which shows us your fat to carb burn and looking at all that. So it's kind of reason I asked is just curiosity about this metabolic flexibility data we can figure out because I think we've got so stuck in that I already said this, but fat metabolism and we have such demonized carb metabolism. It's more about metabolic health, metabolic flexibility, as you said at the beginning of the show, that it's not only, to burn fat. If people want to do fat loss, would you say their goal is to be metabolically flexible, or what would you suggest for how to lose weight? Weight, not muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's kind of it's such an interesting question. And again, there's no perfect answer. There's no keep your glucose under 120 and then of course everything will be perfect. Um, but I do believe that having that flexibility, having that ability to use both fuel sources in your body is really powerful. And I think a lot of it is just, you know, it's what's going to work best for you. What do you feel best? And I think when you are in a very strict ketonic diet, where you're in ketosis for a very long time, it's hard to maintain that kind of forever.
Mhm.
Some people can, but not the majority. And so learning how to be able to use that as a tool and then also how to use carbohydrates as a tool is really a lifetime skill. That's a lifetime metabolic health tool, right? So that you aren't running your pancreatic engine to burn out, right? Which is what's happening with so many people that develop type 2 diabetes. They've basically burned out that engine. So we want to be able to flex into those times where we're burning our ketones, right? We're using that, and then we want to be able to flex out and be able to safely use carbohydrates as a fuel, just depending on where we are in our life cycle. And I think that's really, really powerful. That's that longevity. That's that long-term lifestyle management.
Mhm. Can you say anything else about you were talking about glucose and fat for fuel source, and glucose is easier. Do you want to just any touch on that without going detailed at Krebs cycle?
Oh, no, 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 no. We can't do biochemistry today. I have not brushed up on that.
I've been
I'm not
trying to explain that. It is so confusing, but how glucose metabolism is so just easy. I have this in my slides, so you guys can watch my PowerPoint presentation I'll put up next week, but just visual aids are much easier to explain just the process of creating ATP from glucose versus fat. That's, and you get so much more ATP from fat versus carbs, but how the go-to. So that's why I think it's important to really why I want to do a presentation on metabolic flexibility because people don't, I think I already said this 5 times now, but just how we need to have metabolism of both sources. I think is just so important. And we always go like all in or all out, it's like,
right, right.
paleo, ketones, ketosis, carnivore, carbs are all bad. Now, it's like, okay, what's right? And I just say, eat real food that balances your blood sugar, doesn't spike it too much, come down. I mean, that's why I love a CGM and getting that data because what's right for me to eat? I want to lose weight. I want to feel better. I want to exercise well. Well, We don't know. It depends.
Right,
So
right.
helpful.
And we don't all have the ability to just, you know, just do whatever we want. I think that's probably one of the biggest takeaways that I've learned from counseling so many people is like very few and far between of us are only eating for one person, only cooking for one person, only caring for one person, right?
Mhm.
We live in communities, we live in families, and that requires brain and energy and willpower, and so you have to find what's going to work best for you, what's going to work best for you in terms of your work, in terms of your family, in terms of access to various foods, and palatability. Not everyone likes eggs. No big deal, like, so don't eat eggs. And I think that's really the most important part. I think that's where people find the most success is when they can find a way to use this data to improve their life, not to make their life look like someone else's, but to make their life feel and look and give them more energy and have improved body composition or whatever their health goals to lower their risk of chronic disease, because that's going to be their most successful
Mhm.
outcome.
Yeah, and that's why, you know, end result is chronic disease. If we don't have metabolic flexibility, metabolic health, and have just good activity and sleep and stress management and eating nutrient-dense food. So it's amazing how it all works together.
And it's
Mm.
simple. It really is simple. You don't have to go out and buy, XYZ powder or supplement or whatever it is, right? Sometimes it just takes a little paying attention to your own body and
Mm.
saying like, what is going on? And I like to compare the CGM to like a little window inside your body. I'm like, who doesn't want to see what's going on inside your body? That's so cool. Like,
I know.
how does it look when you have blueberries? How does it look when you have oatmeal? What happens if
Yeah.
you have that smoothie, that protein powder that you like? Like, let's see. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of times people are very surprised by it.
Well, you say that when I was here, oatmeal is like the worst for glucose and sushi rice. And then I always have heard that well, this is my own theory, but people's protein shakes with a banana and berries and mango and pineapple. I'm just like, wait, where's the protein in there? It's a protein shake. How's that? How that must really impact a lot of high glucose spikes.
It's true, and they've just had this great workout and then they have this shake and they're like, "Wow, like look what happens." It's like boinging around. But on the other hand, people there's so much conflicting nutrition advice out there. I'm sure you know this, right? Someone's like, "Yeah, but I have high cholesterol. My doctor said to eat oatmeal." Like, and yeah, there's something to be said. The beta glucans in oatmeal can help sequester the cholesterol and yeah, like there's evidence for that. Your doctor's not wrong, but it's being able to balance like, well, should I worry about blood sugar? Should I worry about my cholesterol? Should I worry about this or should I worry about that? Right. And that's where we try and give a more sort of holistic perspective on it, right? It's like, okay, there's something to be said for oatmeal, but there's also other ways to lower your cholesterol, right?
Mhm.
So let's find something else that you can have, or maybe a way to have the oatmeal if you really love it, to add, some more protein to it, to break your fast with something else first, all of those things. And that's really where the individual nutrition support comes in, because you could sort of spin your wheels all day long testing out different oatmeals and you're like, I don't know what this means, right? And so you have someone there that can really guide you and make educated suggestions to motivate you, to try different things.
Well, and plus the source, the glyphosate on oats and how many
Oh,
people can't do wheat reactive to gluten. It's like, I don't know if there's any good sources unless you're going to go to Europe and pick your own, your own oatmeal. Okay. So one more question on my list. Alcohol. How does that impact glucose? Does it do anything? Can we see any signs of liver, gut health, and just main thing on alcohol and what we can get from a CGM to know, okay, because people think, oh, it's okay. I'm only having 2 drinks. My glucose didn't go up.
yeah. So alcohol is alcohol, the body prioritizes breaking down alcohol before anything else. So
Mhm.
just know that whatever alcohol you're having, the body will not do anything else until it breaks it down and gets rid of it. So basically when your nutrients are lining up in your gut, in your liver and trying to get processed, they will all get pushed aside to deal with the alcohol first. Now, if you're having a higher carbohydrate alcohol like a beer, sugary cocktail, you will see your glucose rise because it does have easily digestible carbohydrates that will hit your system pretty quickly. But what you will see is that if you're drinking liquor or anything like that, you actually probably won't see anything. You won't see a change in your glucose level, depending on if you eat with your alcoholic beverage, right? So if you are having a cocktail before a dinner or you're drinking with your dinner, you will not see your meal get processed, your meal spike. Probably, there will be a delay, 1, 2, depending on the composition of the meal, there will be an hour delay. So where
Mhm.
that comes into play is that, again, like I said, with that recovery metric, if you are eating and drinking maybe 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, and then you sit and you watch some Netflix and you go to bed, you will have larger spikes later in the night. You possibly will not sleep well, but 2, you will have a very long recovery because you're completely sedentary. Your body has no need for any of the fuel that you just gave it. So again, if we're trying to keep our A1C down, that's a lot of glucose floating around with nowhere to go, nothing to do, none of that stuff, right? So if this is something that you're chronically doing every night, 2 glasses of wine plus a meal, and it's 8 o'clock at night, your glucose levels overnight are not going to be ideal. So I always say it really makes the case for happy hour. I'm like, drink at 5, get it done early, have a glass of wine early, have a very balanced meal, be aware of the carbohydrates in your meal, knowing that your body won't get around to processing them for much later on.
Yeah, I have people that were wearing CGM, Nutrisense, and I felt like I was being laughed at. Ha, I didn't do anything to my glucose. I can drink alcohol because I'm trying to suggest in my motivational interviewing behavior coaching strategy and get clients to understand alcohol is not good for you. And it didn't really help me with the CGM, but maybe I'll look over at the nighttime, see if there's some surges.
Yeah, yeah, and ask people because a lot of people say, "Oh, after I drink, like I always wake up in the middle of the night." And a lot of times you can correlate that to a drop in your from your glucose because your body's finally gotten around to processing it at 1, 2 in the
Mm.
morning, and your body and it drops down and you wake up from it, right? And people are like, "Oh, I feel gross in the morning." I mean, it really can disrupt your sleep. It can cause spikes overnight. And again, just a higher exposure is one of our metrics, and that's kind of what I'm talking about, a higher exposure to glucose in your bloodstream for a longer period of time.
Mm. I'm writing that down. That's a good one to remember. So many people I know have this habit of drinking while they're cooking dinner and they have a glass of wine and they have that every night and they don't really see any correlation with gut health. I've read an article on SIBO research that small intestinal bacterial overgrowth with just one drink a night can cause bacterial overgrowth in your gut and having sleep. I know if I have my own personal guidelines of no more than 2 drinks a week and having sometimes I don't have any drink, but if I have a drink, it does totally disrupt my sleep and my deep sleep. And that's why I choose not to drink as much as possible because it's never a good ending, especially if I
Right.
have more than 2. It's never good. So I don't drink more than 2 drinks and I don't really feel good sleeping. And then my workout the next day is crappy. And so I think it's so important to look at, okay, what is your goal? As you said, what are you trying to get? What does health mean to you? What does your future self look like? How do you see yourself living life 5 years from now? And really working on your values and your vision of how you want to perform short-term and long-term future, I think is more important to give people that motivation to make these health choices that are long lasting, not some, oh, I'm going to just be good for 30 days while I have this monitor on. And then I'm going to go back to my ways that make me happy. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah. Well, what else can we do to learn more? You guys have a lot going on. I get these amazing articles coming from Nutrisense. Give us the rundown, the lowdown
Yeah.
update.
Definitely come check us out, nutrisense.io. And I feel like if I say it 3 times, your phone will just feed you all the ads anyways.
That is so true. I looked something up yesterday and I get ads everywhere. It's so fascinating. What? There's spies everywhere. So yeah, you said it verbally, so we're all gonna get they just pop up on the phone. Siri, you're
Exactly.
listening.
Exactly. Everyone's listening.
I
So
respect
so
your
definitely check
privacy
this out.
and only listen when you're talking to me. You can learn about Apple's approach to privacy at apple.com.
Okay, thank you. Example. So inspiring.
Yes, yes. So you'll find us. You can find us online, all the social channels, everything like that. And as you mentioned, we have a great source of articles. We call it the journal. Really interesting, all evidence-based articles, really on any topic in fitness, women's health, glucose management, recipes, all that kind of stuff. So definitely check out our website. And then we are really excited about this new model that we are talking to our members via video chat. So it's really about connecting one-on-one with your nutritionist. These are insurance covered video calls, and we go through your data real time, answer questions real time. So it's really exciting format. We're happy about it. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, it makes a difference, more of an impact when you're visual. You can't just like hide from behind some phone. So that was amazing. So good job on keeping up. I know I'll do the follow up. There's some videos that you guys had blogs. I'm going to do video on as women's health too. I think is important. And my male listeners always like, oh, I don't want to hear about the female stuff. So I'll do that separately so people know it's just for female and glucose. But I think that whole timing of menstrual cycle and hormones and glucose is pretty fascinating too to look at. So I know there's some blogs on that. So thank you so much, Catherine, for your time, and go enjoy your day, and hopefully weekend can start a little early for you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Have a great weekend. This was super fun. Thank you.